Hi and welcome to today's Positive Living. I'm going to be joined by the fantastic MP, Carolyn Harris, who has been raising questions about menopause in Parliament for a good couple of years that I could find out. And so it's a bit boring, so I didn't go that far back, to be honest. But she is an amazing whirlwind of a woman and a great menopause campaigner. And I'm just really, really pleased that she's here with us today. So hope you enjoy it.
My biggest problem was that I didn't know enough about the menopause. And I think that, and I'm not blaming my mother because I love my mother to death, but my mother and her sisters and my mother's generation were from the generation where they didn't use the word hysterectomy, in open conversation. They would be the lifting of the breasts and that you've had it all taken away kind of thing. So in all fairness, I didn't know anything about the menopause. So I don't know what I was expecting. I know that when I was having my first child, I'd been told so much stuff about how awful it was. And when I actually gave birth to Martin, it was a little bit like, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's only the second child you remember how painful it is. And the menopause is very much the same thing. Nobody talked about it. I remember my mother having a hysterectomy when I was quite young, but I don't remember anybody in my family, in my mother's circle of friends, or nobody told me about the menopause. It was only what you hear other people talking about. So you get this impression that it's just the flashes. So in 2003, I had an ectopic pregnancy. And from then, up until 2010, my periods were really, really erratic. So during 2010, I come to a stage where I literally, I would say from the February to the November, I literally had a permanent period. And at times, when I would get up, I could remember being in work, and I was probably wearing 6 sanitary towels at a time. And as long as I was sitting down, I was fine. But once I stood up, literally, I could just feel everything coming away. And it was horrendous. And I remember that I've always had a bathroom upstairs. So I'd be going, if I wanted to go to the toilet, I'd get up halfway up the stairs and I'd stop. And then I'd get to the top of the stairs and I'd stop. And then I'd go into the bathroom. Then I would come out to the bathroom and I'd have to go and sit on the bed to regain my breath. And then I'd go down the same way as I came up, top of the stairs, middle of the stairs, till I eventually came down. And this was going on month after month after month. Once I passed out in the office, I got up to go to the bathroom and I passed out on the office floor. But me being me, didn't do anything about it. And then I would say in about the October, a friend of mine was actually cleaning the office. I was at my desk and she was going away on leave for a week and she was going to Las Vegas. And as she was going, she said, right, I'm going now. I hope you're still here when I come back. And I was busy working. I looked up. I said, what do you mean I hope you're still here to come back? She said, well, by the look of you, you could be dead by the time I come back. And she frightened me a bit. So I picked up the phone there and then and I phoned my GP and I explained the situation. And he said, oh, come and see me immediately. So my husband took me down because by this time I couldn't drive. I didn't trust myself to drive. And I was always anemic. So he took me down to my doctor's surgery, who took my blood, sent me immediately down the hospital to have my blood tested. We drove back from the hospital. And by the time I got in the house, my GP was on the phone telling me I needed to go straight back down to the hospital. They were expecting me. They would admitted me. My hemoglobin was 4. And I walked into the ward and the nurse said to me, oh, you're the woman who's the living dead. And because of my anemia and I'd gone on for so long, just losing all this blood and just soldiering through, that I think I was killing myself slowly. So they did an emergency operation that night, and the problem was fibroids. So I had the fibroids removed, and I've never seen since. But what I don't really know is whether it was the fibroids that were bleeding, or whether so the fibroids may have been bleeding for a couple of years, and I'd stopped my periods a couple of years before. I don't know, because honestly, it wasn't something we talked about. So when I came out of hospital, I came out just after the armistice day. And I was really ill. I mean, I was off work for 7 months. By the Christmas, physically I was getting better, but psychologically I wasn't. I was getting worse, and I was going down and down and down. Now I thought that I was having a nervous breakdown. So when I was going to my GP, who was absolutely fantastic and I think saved my life, I was giving him the symptoms of somebody who was going anxiety and depression and a nervous breakdown. And he did actually recommend, and I took cognitive behavior therapy, and I was put on antidepressants. And no, I'm not embarrassed to say I'm still on them. So I've been on antidepressants for 10 years. So I don't blame my GP at all, because he was absolutely fantastic. I blame myself because I didn't know enough about the menopause, for not identifying that the forgetfulness, the dreadful pain in my stomach, which I was having for months, when I'd have to go and lay in the attic under an open window, because it would start like a sickness pain in my stomach, and it would come up through my body. And by the time it got to my forehead, I would be perspiring like something you can't imagine. I now know I was having the flushes, but I didn't know enough. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to consider myself to be quite an intelligent woman. So if I didn't know enough about it, then it's possible that a lot of other women are in the same position as me, especially my generation, where their mothers probably didn't talk about it, or it was something that you said in hushed tones, or you would discuss the fact that the woman next door was had it all taken away, kind of thing, almost as if it was a sin or an embarrassment or taboo, and so anyway, month after month after month, I had CBT, I was having antidepressants, was taking them, and it took me about 7 months. And I knew I was ill, because during that 7 months, I mean, I'd always, I got dark hair. It's not purple by nature, but I got dark hair, but I'd always done things with my hair. It's either been red or I'd had highlights, And I remember when I did go back to work after 7 months, being grey, and the people in work were like, my God. But I just didn't want to do anything. I hid under a pink anorak with a hoodie for 7 months. I'd go shopping, I'd go into a shop, somebody would look at me, I would just leave my shopping and come out. And again, I was absolutely convinced I was having a breakdown. I now know that was the menopause, and I think I'd come to that point where I couldn't hide it anymore, because I had a physical problem. It had accentuated, and everything that was built up inside me, it just came flooding out, and I ended up I was just in a dreadful, dreadful, dreadful state. One thing I would say is I came out of that experience much stronger, and I suppose we're all capable of being a doormat in some respects, whether it's for the person you work with, or the person you work for, or for the family, or whatever. I think women even more so. I am a victim of imposter syndrome. I've always said this, that I spent my life thinking somebody was going to tell me, excuse me, what are you doing there? You shouldn't be there. And that all came to a head during that time. And whilst I'm still quite, like most women, insecure in that, you keep thinking now somebody's going to say, I don't think that you were meant to have that job, love. I think we got your name mixed up with someone else. I'm not a doormat anymore. I learned from that experience that I gained the strength to actually start saying no, and to say, well, no, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I'm going to answer back. So I suppose in a way it might have created a bit of a monster, because I probably wouldn't be the person I am now had I not gone through that experience, because I would have just taken it all in my stride and accepted it, whereas I don't accept things now. So it was a really bad time, but one thing I learned from it was that I turned it into a positive, but then I've always turned the huge negatives, and like losing my son, for example, that was a huge, huge, huge blow in my life. I turned that to, my emphasis went into going into university when I was 34, because you can go either way, can't you? You either go down or you go up.
Yeah.
And I decided I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to be the victim of it. I was going to be in control of it. And no matter how, some days we all get off days, and I get some really bad off days. I still get days now with the menopause where, I know it's the menopause now, and I feel really rubbish, but I'm in control of it now. So even though I can't bat it away, I can't dictate to it, I know how to deal with it. So every day is something different. But I think I've had to do that since I was 29 because of losing my son. So I've spent most of my adult life trying to control every day and dealing with whatever that day brings me as an individual. So my experience of it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But I think it was worse through ignorance. I know, probably completely different if I was to go through it now. But at that time, it was down to ignorance. So 10 years ago, I knew a fraction of what I know now. Like, I know now that the forgetfulness was not me losing my mind. It was all part of the symptom. You know, the irrational moods weren't me, you know, being impatient. It's all part of it. You know, the flushes but like I said, it was a physical operation that actually brought it all to a head.
And how did you do the HRT? Did you do any treatments? Did the CBT
No.
help?
The CBT helped. I think the CBT helped change my personality because I'd always been a cup half full person. I was always the kind of person who would always have to think the worst. A bit like I said about giving birth, it being the worst possible experience in your life. Because anything that wasn't the worst was a relief. You know, and I think a lot of that has come from losing Martin when I was losing Martin full stop. But I think because the worst thing in the world happened to me, then that could never happen again. But if I thought that was possible, then I was grateful for whatever did happen. Does that make sense? It's like a fear. Like if I was afraid that if I would think I'm going to pass my exams, or I'm going to pass and be confident about passing my exams, then the consequences if I failed would be end of the world devastating. So I have to think, and I still do to a slight effect. I mean, I suppose standing for election is very similar. I mean, this is, well, it's always been a relatively safe seat. It is a safe seat, and hopefully next time I'll increase my majority because it did go down a bit at the last election. But I always think, even on an election, I'm going to lose. And when I see them emptying the ballot boxes, I see everybody else's votes and I don't see mine. And, you know, I'm counting everybody else's votes, but I'm not counting mine. It's only when I see the final table, when I can see how many pies they've got and how many pies, then I'm okay. But up until that point, I'm like, oh, I've lost. So I am a little bit, that, you know, but I think that is a safety net. I think that is a shield that I put up to say, you know, if I think the worst, then whatever does happen can only be better than what I'm anticipating it to be.
Yeah,
the CBT did help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mum does exactly the same. She prepares for the worst, and then when the best happens, she goes, oh, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my grandmother had always had to say, and it's always true that, you know, when we have a worry, I'd have you dead, buried, and all your clothes washed. And, you know, it's a quaint old saying, but it's very true, you know. So if one of the kids had fallen over, by the time it had permeated in my brain, they'd had their leg off, and, you know, all these things. It's just, I've got to think the worst, but I'm getting better at that. But I think the CBT did help me at the time. It certainly helped me during that time to turn all the negatives, because when you're in that state, there are no positives. So over that 7 months when I was really suffering, and I mean really suffering, there was nothing that I could even consider to be remotely good. You know, I would have, the electric bill would come in, and I was on full pay, but the electric bill would come in, and my husband was working full time. And by the time I'd opened the envelope, I'd forgotten that we paid by direct debit. I'd forgotten that the money was still in the bank. I'd forgotten that it wasn't something I had to do. And for about 10 minutes, until I rationalised it through, I'm thinking, I'm going to get the money for this bill, blah, blah, blah. No, and that's how I got, it was a dreadful, dreadful experience. But it was definitely the menopause. I don't think HRT would have done me any good, because I wasn't in the right frame of mind to try anything. I just wanted to feel better, but, you know, HRT wouldn't have come onto my horizon, because I didn't know about it. I knew about HRT. I heard other people talk about HRT, but I didn't know enough about menopause. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't something that you understood. We are better now, but we talked earlier on, Liz, about it now being on the curriculum. I think that's essential. I've said that in the chamber. If somebody had talked to me in school, they didn't talk to me about periods in school. No, well, at least we do talk about periods now. I remember a girl in school having a period in home economics, and absolutely the class were hysterical laughing. When I think back now, my God, you know, what kind of people were we to allow that to happen? But that's what happened. You know, we did. Now girls and boys are learning far more. They know far more than we did, and we thought we were worldly. But in comparison to what youngsters are today, we knew nothing. And in comparison to what the next generation below me are, we certainly knew nothing. No, I think we have gradually got better over the years, but there's still a long way to go. And menopause is one of those things that we're only now talking about. Men have been a little bit more comfortable about talking about periods for a little while. It was periods and menopause were the things you'd say in conversation. It wasn't considered polite conversation to discuss this in front of men. You know, modern man thinks nothing of the woman using the word periods. My husband still blushes. I would never say it in front of my father. My father would be horrified. But it's generational things, isn't it? And I think this, certainly for me anyway, being working class, and maybe it's the Welsh thing, because we are slightly more old-fashioned, I suppose, not in our thinking, but in a lot of the things that, you know, we still have funeral teas with ham sandwiches and fruit cake. You know, it's a traditional thing. We don't talk about these things, so we've got to start talking about them. But and now I talk about everything. But that's since I became an MP. Since I've become an MP, I've talked about subjects I wouldn't dream of talking about to another person, never mind in the chamber. But you know, we develop, and we are developing, and it's up to my generation to promote and encourage other generations to actually be far more open and to learn more, and to make sure that those coming behind us know all there is to know about these things, so that they are prepared, they know where to go, the services they need are there, the support that they need is there, the information, everything is there for them. So it's not a thing, it's not a big thing, it's something that just happens with nature, and we accept it as a part and parcel of life. Everybody.
Which is why we're so passionate at Pausitivity about getting the posters in GPs' rooms, because that is one place every woman will go.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had 3 tips for someone going through the menopause now, or the next generation. What would they be, Carolyn?
Don't be afraid to talk about it to anybody, because you'd be surprised what other people will share with you. And you know, be that person who instigates that conversation, because somebody's got to be brave. And I think, you know, be that brave person. When you go to the doctors, ask the doctor, what do they know about the menopause? Because you'll probably be absolutely horrified how little they know about the menopause. So ask them what they know about it, and don't allow them to put you off from having HRT or from developing the conversation, because they may be insecure about their knowledge, but don't judge them, because it's not that it wasn't in their training. We need to get that right. So you question the GP about their knowledge of menopause. Find if anybody else in the surgery is better informed about menopause. You know, ask your GP's surgery to actually maybe start a working group on menopause, so that you understand that, you know, they will learn from you as much as you will gain in terms of treatment from them. And embrace it, turn it to a positive. It can be a bloody awful time, but there will be things that you can do with it, which will, and even if what you do with it by embracing it is only helping other women who come behind you, then that's fine, because you know you were making somebody else's life. You were leaving a legacy. My generation didn't have that legacy, because women didn't. They just suffered in silence. A lot of women ended up on the scrap heap and never ever got back into the environment of working or back into socializing, because once they'd come away from all that, then they consider themselves to be too old after, because they've gone through the menopause. Menopause doesn't define you, and it certainly doesn't define your age, because you could be 25 and have the menopause. So don't allow it to be the end of your life. Leave it be something which you use to a positive to go forward and have a better life.
I love that last one, definitely. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
No problem.
Thank you.